Welcome to video 25 on strings and string basics. This is part one of a two-part video. So guys, the purpose for this video, part one of two videos, for you to understand the basics of strings, their core features and functionality. And specifically, we will be looking at iterating through strings as collections of characters, finding the location of a character in a string, changing the case to all uppercase or all lowercase, and counting occurrences of a character in a string. There's no theory in this particular video, guys. We'll be looking at theory and background in a later video when we look at the OCR ERL spec as well. So guys, it would help, you will get the most from this video if you are comfortable with Python loops, condition and selection, variables, constants and casting, and if you have a basic understanding of the Python list data structure. So guys, in the Monster Resources folder on Schoology, you will find some additional documents to help you with your Python knowledge and skills. The playlist and booklet PDF presents these videos separated by playlist or designated by playlist, and then suggests the relevant Python Monster booklet to support the topic being addressed by the playlist. In addition, the catalog PDF presents the videos in sequence along with a copy of the contents and the play position of individual parts of the video that you will find on YouTube. So let's crack on and do some Python demos. As you are aware, there are 5 data types that you guys need to know for your GCSE, but Python only has 4 because there's no char or character data type built into the Python language. But having said that, it's still very helpful to think of strings as being collections of individual characters. As such, we can loop or iterate through a string to pick out the component characters. So let's take the opportunity to revise the main loop structures available in Python. So that's the for loop or the count controlled loop, the while loop, which we can also refer to as a type of condition controlled loop, excuse me guys, and the special Python collection loop structure. So guys, as I'm sure you're aware, not only are strings collections of characters, but those characters we can identify in the string because they're given index values, and the indexes start at 0 and we simply count and increment up until the end of the string. So we have the first character at position 0, next character in the string at position 1, and so on, and we can use that in our iteration structure. So let's start off by assigning some values to some variables. So a string of word type string, so let's put in there hello, and we're going to use a constant because we don't use those very often. Okay, so I'm going to put in a comment constant, and let's say, okay, so a constant len, uppercase guys, because that's the preferred convention for constants to be all uppercase, is assigned the value of the length of the word because we're going to be using that in our future code. Okay, so let me just scroll down a little bit. So let's put a comment in here which says for loop structure, and let's do a for loop. So for in range, and then we will start off at position 0 up to, but not including, the length of the character, the length of the string, sorry. And then we want indentation. I'm going to assign to the variable char the character at that particular index of the string. So char becomes, and then we want word, and then we want at position count. Okay, and then of course we want to print that out. And this is what I want to get on the screen, guys, when I run the program. So rather than printing hello down the screen, I want to print it across the screen. And to do that, we need to print char, of course. But we need to put an extra parameter on the end which says end equals, and then we want to specify a space between each of our characters printed across the screen. So let's run that, just make sure I get the output that I want. So there we go. So there we have hello. Okay, so that's how to print the individual characters of a string using the traditional Python for loop. We could also do the same thing in a while loop as well. So let me just scroll up a little bit. So let's put a comment in which says, using a while loop, All right, and we want another variable assigned. We need to initialize a variable called count to the value of 0, because we're going to have to manually count and increment in a while loop. So we want to say while, and then we need count is less than len. Okay, and then we need to do the same as we did before, guys. So I'm just going to copy this out here and then paste it underneath. There we go. So char becomes, okay, the value of the character at that particular index within the string, and we've started off here with count equals loop. So that will be, in the first iteration, the value of count will be 0. Okay, and then we need to remember, in a while loop, we have to increment count manually. Okay, a for loop does that for us automatically. In a while loop, we have to do that manually. Okay, so let's run that. I'm just going to put an extra print new line statement here, guys, because otherwise it's all going to be scrunched up. So let me just pop that in now. So print new line. Okay, so let's run our code. Shall we yeah, let's pop in, oh, I've done that already, that's cool. I was going to say I need to pop in the across the screen print format, but I copied and pasted that, so that's fine. So we should get the same, and indeed we do. Okay, it's the same output, two different types of loops producing the same type of output. And the last one is the very simple to use Python collection iteration, where we simply say for char in word, okay, and then we want to print char. Okay, just like we did before, and then we want comma and then end equals, okay, with the space. And let's pop in that new line character as well. There we go. So let's run these and see if we get all three the same, and we do, guys. So there we have, same output, but three different structures and three different approaches to iteration, all of which are available to you. The for loop, okay, the while loop structure, and the wonderfully simple and brilliantly conceived Python's collection loop, guys, where you can simply loop in this format or iterate through a Python collection, and a string we can include as a Python collection of smaller data. Before we move on, guys, I am going to insist that I put comments in for all of my relevant blocks of code, because if you've seen previous videos, guys, you'll know that I am terrible at remembering. Whilst I'm busy typing and talking, terrible at remembering to put in comments where they really ought to be. So let's just wrap up by putting in suitable comments. So I'm going to put in here using the Python collection loop syntax. Okay, so does that look commented and nice and neat? Yeah, happy with that. Okay, so let's move on. So I want to show you how we can use the string related Python find function to find the location of a particular character in a string. It gives you the index value where that counter is found. And this bit here, guys, where it says the dot style syntax, if you've been through previous Python monster videos, you'll know what that means, but I will go through it briefly at the end of this demo. Okay, so let's make a start. We need to get some input from the user. So let's start with name equals, and then we want input. It's a string data type, guys, we're after, so we don't need to cast anything. Okay, so what I'm after, as you will have gathered, let's just move this over. Please input your first name and your last name separated by a space. Okay, so what I'm after, okay, is the ability to be able to look at the user's first name and last name, and then to determine the length of their first name and the length of their second name. Okay, so that's what I'm planning on doing, all being well. Let's print that out so that we have confirmation of what the user's input. So let's put, and then we want concatenate with the name. Okay, so that's job done. And then I am going to use another constant, okay, and we're going to do what we did before. So len becomes len of name. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do then is we need to find the location of the space character that separates the first name and the last name in the single string input. So let's give it a sensible variable name. So let's say And the syntax, guys, is the name of the string, dot, and then we want find, and then we want the character that we need to find. So in this case it's a space, so it's just quote and then space and then end quote. Okay, so that's the syntax that we use. Let me make this a little bit bigger for you. There we go. Now if you think about it, and you can pause the video to work this out for yourself, guys, the location of the space is actually the same as the length of the string that precedes it. Okay, so if you've got the location of the space in the string, that will tell us the length of the first name. So what I will do is I will give us a more sensible variable name for the length of the first name. So let's put in len first name becomes the same as space located. Okay, and then we need to calculate from that the length of the second name, and we can do that because we know the length of the entire string. So the actual little calculation for this is len of second name. This is the variable I'm going to call this second calculation. So len second name becomes, and then it will be len, okay, minus, all right, the first length of the first name, and then minus 1. Okay, have you had a thought, guys, or figured out why that calculation is correct? Okay, well the principal reason actually is because the length of the entire string includes the space character, so we need to take that out of the calculation just to give us the length of the first and second name. So if you're not sure that that works, pause the video, okay, and just doodle something on paper if you want to with a first and second name example, and then see if you agree with that calculation. So it should be len minus the length of the first name and then minus 1 to cater for the fact that we don't want to include the space in there. Okay, so we need to print out some relevant output. Let me just put a comment in here, guys. So let's put in here calculations as our comment, and then here my comments will be print out results. Okay, and then some formatted print. So let's say your first name is, then I want to say the length and then characters long. Okay, so that's what I'm after. So your first name is, and then we want to concatenate, we want to cast to a string data type, okay, because the lengths are integer values. So we want the string version of the length of the first name. Okay, and then we just want to wrap up that sentence. So it will be concatenated with and characters long. Okay, so that'll do nicely for our first. Sorry guys, I'm trying to talk while I'm thinking. It doesn't always work. I forgot to put the plus in there to concatenate. Okay, so I was just looking at that PyCharm error that I was getting up. So I'm going to copy and paste and tweak because it's almost the same, isn't it? So your second name, I'll put last name actually, your last name, and then we just need to switch out the variable from first name to second name. There we go, and that should work for us. So let's just do a double check. We've got name, okay, and we've got name in there, so input is name, length equals len name, our calculations, okay, and then print out results. So that looks okay. So let's just run this and see if we get something vaguely sensible. Okay, so let's just move that across and zoom in a little bit if I can. Okay, so your first and last name separated by a space, so let's put that in. Okay, and it says your input is Stephen Hill. Your first name is 6 characters long, which looks suspiciously correct, and your last name is 4 characters long. That looks suspiciously correct too. So I'm pleased with that. Let's just run it again, okay, with another name, just to make sure that you guys don't think that that was a fluke as a one-off. So let's put in here, I don't know, Peter Wilson. Okay, so input is Peter Wilson. Your first name is 5 characters long, which is correct, and also 6 characters long for Wilson, which is correct too. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Now I did say that I would go back and briefly talk about this comment that I put at the top here, which says the dot style syntax. So you may be familiar with this, guys. Python offers you 2 different types or syntax for function, okay, to get your heads around. And if I just zoom in so you can see examples, we have the sort of standard syntax where you have the name of the function followed by brackets, and then you may or may not need to have to put something in between the brackets. So a print function and an input function are examples of those. So you have the name of the verb, or the command at the beginning, followed by brackets. Now the other style or syntax of function that you may come across looks like this. Okay, in fact the technical term for this is a method, not a function, but you guys can continue to call these functions. Okay, for your GCSE it doesn't really matter, but you just need to be aware that in Python there are two different approaches to using functions. So in this dot syntax, okay, it's different because instead of the object being in the brackets, we actually use the object followed by a dot. Okay, and our function tends to have a different name. So it's the find function related specifically to our string called name, and then again in the brackets, guys, you may or may not need to put something, but it's not going to be the name, okay, because you've already defined the name there. So it's just to be aware that those two styles of syntax exist in Python. And of course, the more you practice Python, the more you will become familiar with which format offers you which different type of function. Okay, right, so let's move on, guys. Let's do another demo. So in this demo, I want to cover off how you can find the number of occurrences of a specific character in a string, so how you can count those, and the ability to be able to convert any string from its existing format into completely uppercase or completely lowercase, one or the other. And I thought, in order to show you how these functions work, we'll set ourselves a little challenge, and the challenge is find the number of occurrences of characters in a word provided by the user, and then print out in the format number of times that whatever the character is appears and then the count of the number of occurrences. Okay, so that's the format that we want at the end. Okay, so we need to get a word from the user. So let's do initialize variables. Okay, and initialize variables. Okay, so we put our comment in. So let's get my string becomes input. Okay, no casting here, guys, because we're just working with string inputs. So please input a single word. Okay, so we just want a single word from the user, so that's cool. And let's print that out to confirm. So print, right, your input is, and then we want to concatenate that with my string. Okay, so that's cool. So let's do some code. So we're going to, what we need to do is we need to iterate through the string that the user's given us through the word, and then we want to count the number of occurrences that each of those characters appears in the actual string itself. Okay, so let's use a Python for loop for this, I hope. Python for loop. So we want for count in range. Okay, and I'm going to put 0, comma, and of course len, guys, so up to but not including the length. Okay, and then we want to, oh, I haven't put in the variable len, guys, have I? How naughty. Constant. Okay, and then len, as before, len equals the length of my string in this case, guys. Okay, so for count in range 0 to up to but not including len. Okay, indentation, let's assign to a variable called char the actual value of the character at that position in the string. So that will be my string at position in square brackets of at count, position count, okay, or index count. Okay, and what we want to say is we want something which says a variable occurrence, let's say occurrence becomes, and then we want to do the count. We want to use the count function. So let's do my string, and then syntax, guys, let me just zoom in, okay, and move down a little bit if I can. Okay, so we want my string, it's a dot syntax for this particular function, and it is count. Okay, and then we want to count the number of times that character where we've got to in the string appears in the whole string. Okay, so that should do nicely, and then we just want to print out the results. So let's say, as was required in the challenge, number of times that, okay, and then we want to concatenate with char, which is a string data type, guys, so no casting. Okay, plus, and then we want to finish our sentence off, appears is, and then we want to concatenate that with the string, cast of occurrence, because that actually is an integer, isn't it? So there we go with occurrence. So let me just move that over a little bit. Okay, so does that look like it's going to work? So we've input the string, we're looping through each occurrence of the character in the string, and then for each occurrence, which is char, we are looking to see how many times that the individual character appears in the entire string or the entire word from the user. Okay, do I need double brackets in there? I'm not sure that I do. There we go, so that will work. And then we simply print out the number of times that char appears is the string of occurrence. So that looks okay, doesn't it? So let's run that with an example then. Okay, so input a single word. So let's put in hello, and we get. Okay, so your input is hello. Well, that's a good start. Number of times that H appears is 1. Number of times that E appears is 1. Oh. It looks like we've got a bit of a challenge, guys, here. I had a feeling this wasn't going to be quite as simple as we thought it is, because, of course, because we're iterating through, we're actually going through the process of counting the letter L twice. So even though the calculation is correct, we've still got the printout twice there. Okay, so it's not entirely not correct, but it's not entirely effective and efficient either. So what we want to do is we want to find a way of saying to Python in the code, if we have already looked at the character L, we don't need to look at it again because we've already done that, so we can ignore L. So we need to find a logical way of doing that in the code. So what you might want to do, guys, actually, is before I attempt to do that myself, is for you guys to have a think about what that enhanced solution might look like. Okay. So guys, what we could do is we could have a separate string which simply is concatenated or accumulates all of the characters that we've looked at, and then we get Python to check in that string to see if we've already examined a particular occurrence of a character. So by the time we get to L, the second time in our loop, when Python looks at our little concatenated store of characters we've looked at, it will say HEL, and then basically Python will go, okay, L's already in that little accumulated string that we're managing in the code, so I don't need to look at that character again. I can just go to the next character. Okay, so I'm sure there are different ways of doing this, guys. You might even be able to use continue as a keyword in there as well. But this is the solution that I've been thinking of. So let me just move that over. What we want to then is we want a condition in here which basically says if char, so that's the character not there obviously because we haven't assigned char there, have we? So it wants to be here. Okay, so once we've assigned a value to char, okay, we want to say if char, okay, is not in, and then we want some variable. This is our little string that we're concatenating and accumulating the characters we've already looked at. So let's call that extra string string to date. Okay, so that's what we've looked at to date. All right, so string, let's say string to date. Okay, now we don't have it's underlined, guys, because we don't have an initial value for string to date, so I'm going to need to put that initial value up here. Okay, so let me copy and paste my new variable name. There we go, so string to date, and we want to initialize that with a null string. Okay, so just 2 quotes back to back will basically give Python a clean value to look at. Okay, so that will work. And then we want to say at the end, because it's an if statement, guys, we want a colon, and then we want to shift these along so that they're indented properly. Okay, let's just move that along as well. So if char not in string to date, then if that's true, then we carry on and start looking at appearances or occurrences, I should say, of that character in the string. Okay, and then somehow we need to concatenate, don't we, and accumulate values in our new string. So at the bottom here, okay, it's going to be outside the if statement. We want to say string to date becomes string to date and then plus character. Okay, so we keep that little lookup string, if you like, up to date with the most recent character that we've looked at. So I think that should work. Let me just zoom out before I run it, guys. Let me just double check, and I ought to put some comments in here as well. So let's put validate if char is already checked. Okay. And then here I ought to put a little comment that says end of if block, which is something I always do, guys, but frequently forget. So it's something I always intend to do but frequently forget, is to mark off with the comments the end of an individual little block of code. Okay, so here we're saying string to date becomes string to date plus the character that we've already looked at. So I think that should work okay. So let's run it and see if we get something that looks a little bit more effective this time around. Okay, so input a single word, so let's do hello again, so we've got something to compare it with. Oh, that looks much better, doesn't it? So now we've got the correct calculations, all right, but we've also catered for the fact that we don't need to print out the evaluation of L twice, just because it happens to be there twice in the string. Okay, so I'm pleased with that. And while I was doing that, guys, I've just thought I have covered in previous videos the Python feature continue on a number of occasions actually, and it wouldn't take a lot just to show you what a continue solution, or a solution with the continue keyword in, looks like. So for those of you that are familiar with continue, let's do the continue version. See how many times I can mention the word continue. Let's do the continue version. So to use continue, basically what we need to do is to flip this over from the negated version to the sort of positive version. So if the character is in string to date, okay, then we want to continue. Okay, otherwise, remember guys, there's no else component with an if statement. Okay, we just carry on with the indentation that we would normally see for the rest of our code. Okay, so it should look something like this. Okay, so I'm just going to change that to put validate using continue. So let's just run through the logic of this. We are saying, okay, for character blah blah blah, char equals the character at that position. Okay, if the character is already in string to date, then continues. In other words, miss this iteration. Otherwise, okay, then occurrence does become the most recent character, and we're printing it out, and then we also want to do the accumulation of the new string. So that looks okay to me. So let's run this again and make sure that that works. Okay, so input a single word, let's pop in hello, and yep, that works okay as well. So we have everything that we would expect. So there's not a great deal in terms of the efficiency of the solution, because we've only tinkered around with a couple of lines of code. The big difference actually you will have noticed is that our condition, we've changed that from a condition where we're evaluating the negative, so in other words not in, and with continue of course we're checking to see if it is actually in, so that becomes a positive condition to evaluate. Okay, and really that's the only difference, right? But I thought I would pop in the continue solution as well, so that you can see those two and compare them. Okay guys, let's move on to the next demo. So guys, before we move on to the next video, which is part 2, I just wanted to cover off the changing of a string to all uppercase or all lowercase. Okay, so it's relatively straightforward. It uses the Python uses the dot format for these functions, but just to give you an example, if we say word becomes, and let's have hello world, okay, as our string. So we've put capital letters for the first and for the second name. To convert that, I can simply, let's print it straight out actually. I will say let's do lowercase is, and let's just concatenate with that with, and then what we want to do is we want to pop in the name of the string and then dot. Now what we can do is, if I scroll down, you will see, in fact let me scroll up, that would be easier. You can see where my cursor is that there is actually a Python function, or strictly speaking a method, called lower, and we can use that, but in fact there's a better one, and the reasons for that I won't go into, but it's actually a more effective and efficient way for Python to convert string to lowercase. You can, guys, of course use lower, but the one that tends to be the preferred one is casefold. So if you see casefold in examples on the internet or in textbooks, you will know where that comes from. It's the alternative for using word.lower. Okay, so that would be lowercase, and let's do the same for uppercase. So let's pop that in. So uppercase becomes, and this one's simpler, guys. You can probably guess what the keyword is going to be for uppercase. It is indeed word dot. Okay, and if I scroll down, you will find it here, which is upper. Okay, so let's just run that, and hopefully it works okay. Right, so there we are. So the all lowercase version is hello world, and the all uppercase version is hello world in uppercase. So no surprises there, guys, but just really to mention that you do have a choice. You can use casefold instead of using lower, and also to say, of course, it is yet another example of the dot format, or the dot syntax, that Python presents to you as its function, or strictly speaking, the method. Okay guys, that wraps up this video. I will see you in part 2.